In the first-class cabin of a flight from New York to Los Angeles, the quiet atmosphere was suddenly broken by the harsh sound of a flight attendant slapping a 5-year-old girl. The girl stopped, her eyes widened in surprise, then hugged her cheeks, tears silently rolling down her chin. No one in the compartment had time to react immediately, but a look of surprise appeared on everyone's faces. Next to the little girl, Jessica's mother sat motionless, paralyzed. She and her mother dressed simply but not elaborately, not the type of passengers one usually sees in first class. However, that did not go unnoticed by Lisa, a sharp flight attendant with an eye for judgment. As she passed Jessica's seat, she tilted her head slightly and whispered to her colleague Mark. "They probably won some promotional giveaway or got their tickets through someone else," Lisa whispered, her eyes lingering on them with a hint of skepticism. Mark said nothing, merely shrugging. The flight had been smooth until little Emily, Jessica's daughter, accidentally spilled her juice on the tray table. Lisa, standing nearby, frowned deeply and let out an exasperated sigh. "I'm sorry, she didn't mean to," Jessica quickly said, grabbing a napkin to clean the mess. But Lisa wasn't listening. Her eyes hardened as they locked onto Emily with quiet disdain. "You should teach your child how to behave properly. This is first class, not a playground." A few passengers turned their heads, murmuring among themselves. Emily's cheeks flushed crimson, a mix of embarrassment and fear. "I sincerely apologize," Jessica replied calmly, her voice steady but unwavering. "I hope so," Lisa muttered before turning away. Less than a minute later, Emily hesitantly reached out and tugged at Lisa's sleeve as she passed by. "I'm really sorry about earlier," the little girl whispered, her innocent eyes filled with remorse. Lisa stopped. She looked down at the tiny hand clutching her sleeve, her expression twisting into irritation. "Don't touch me," she snapped. In that instant, something flickered in Lisa's eyes, a flash of anger she couldn't contain. And then, almost as if on instinct, her hand shot out, and a loud slap echoed through the cabin as it struck Emily's delicate cheek. The entire first-class section seemed to freeze in time. Jessica immediately wrapped her arms around her daughter, her eyes burning with suppressed fury. Around them, passengers halted whatever they were doing. The murmurs of curiosity turned into loud whispers of shock. Mark, Lisa's colleague, went pale as he rushed forward. "What the hell did you just do, Lisa?" Mark demanded, his voice filled with disbelief. But Lisa simply folded her arms, lifting her chin defiantly. "I was just teaching the girl a lesson. If her mother won't discipline her, I will." An elderly man stood up from his seat, his gaze sharp as a blade. "You have no right to do that. Hitting a child? That's completely unacceptable." Anger spread like wildfire. Some passengers voiced their outrage, while others stood firmly in support of the mother and her daughter. The once luxurious first-class cabin now felt like a battlefield, with a storm brewing on the horizon. "Don't touch me," Lisa snapped, her voice sharp with irritation. Yet, little Emily still looked up at her with wide, innocent eyes, searching for some sign of understanding. But there was none. In a flash, before anyone could react, Lisa lost control. A sharp, deafening slap cut through the air. Emily stumbled backward, her tiny hands clutching her cheek as silent tears welled up in her eyes. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Jessica gasped, instantly pulling her daughter into a protective embrace, her body rigid with fury. But she didn't speak. Not yet. She simply held her child close, her heart pounding like a war drum. For a moment, time stood still. Passengers around them froze, whispering in hushed voices, their shocked expressions mirroring the sheer disbelief of what had just happened. Mark, who had been standing nearby, rushed forward, his face drained of color. "Lisa, what the hell are you doing?" Lisa, though realizing she had gone too far, refused to back down. Instead, she crossed her arms and lifted her chin defiantly. "I was teaching her a lesson. That kid has no manners, and her mother clearly doesn't discipline her." A deep, authoritative voice cut through the tension. "And what gives you the right to lay a hand on a child?" An elderly man, Mr. Lewis, rose from his seat, his eyes burning with outrage. Around the cabin, murmurs of agreement rippled through the passengers. Some gasped in horror, while others fumed at the blatant act of cruelty. Lisa scoffed. "You don't know the full story, so don't be so quick to judge. Besides, you're not my boss." Mr. Lewis narrowed his eyes. "Do you even understand where you are? This is an airline, not your personal domain. If you can't conduct yourself professionally, you don't belong in this position." Mark placed a firm hand on Lisa's arm, trying to defuse the situation. "Lisa, let me handle this. Just step back." But Lisa pulled away. "No, Mark. I did nothing wrong and I won't apologize to people who don't even belong here. That mother and her kid probably got these seats through some giveaway. Jessica remained silent, her piercing gaze locked onto Lisa. There was no anger in her expression, just a quiet, unwavering determination. At that moment, another flight attendant, Isabella, hurried over. Her face was lined with concern as she knelt beside Jessica. "Ma'am, I am so terribly sorry for what just happened," Isabella said softly, her voice carrying the weight of sincerity. Jessica exhaled slowly, running a soothing hand through Emily's hair. "We'll be all right. My priority is my daughter's well-being." Lisa scoffed again. "Why are you even apologizing? I didn't do anything wrong." That was the last straw. Mark's patience snapped. "Lisa, if you don't stop now, I'll have no choice but to report this to management." For the first time, Lisa hesitated. A flicker of doubt crossed her face, but she shoved it aside, clinging to her arrogance. She still believed she could get away with it, she always had before. Meanwhile, Jessica turned her attention back to Emily, gently wiping the last of her daughter's tears. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she whispered. Emily nodded weakly, still pressing her face against her mother's chest. Nearby, a woman named Mrs. Teresa could no longer hold back her anger. "Ma'am, I am so sorry you and your daughter had to experience this. That flight attendant had no right to treat you this way." Jessica gave a small, grateful smile. "Thank you. I just hope this won't leave a lasting impact on my daughter." Mrs. Teresa's expression hardened. "Are you going to file a complaint?" "You should. No child deserves to be treated like that, especially not on a first-class flight." Jessica nodded. "I will. But right now my focus is on my daughter." Mr. Lewis smiled approvingly. "Good. And know this, you are not alone. Many of us here will stand with you." Meanwhile, Lisa retreated to the back of the cabin, her confidence beginning to waver as she noticed the growing whispers and disapproving stares from the passengers. Even Mark was shaking his head at her in disappointment. "Lisa," he said quietly, "look around you. Even the passengers can see how wrong you were. They can file complaints too, you know. And if enough of them do, no one, not even your connections, will be able to save you." Lisa tensed. She knew Mark was right. But her pride wouldn't let her admit it. A hush fell over the cabin as Jessica gently stroked Emily's hair, whispering reassurances. "Don't cry, sweetheart. Mommy's here. Everything will be okay." The once grand atmosphere of the first-class cabin had soured into a heavy storm of tension. And deep down Lisa knew, this was far from over. Everything was spiraling out of control. Mark sighed, but he knew there was nothing he could do if Lisa refused to listen. "I know, but she won't budge. If we don't act now, things are only going to get worse." Lisa kept up her confident facade, but it was clear she was growing uneasy. The eyes fixed on her felt like daggers, piercing through the arrogant mask she had always worn. Memories of past complaints she had always escaped thanks to her connections, flashed through her mind. But this time something was different. From her seat, Jessica quietly watched Lisa. And in that instant, Lisa felt a cold shiver run down her spine. Jessica wasn't like any other passenger she had encountered before. That realization unsettled Lisa, though she pushed the feeling aside. Nearby, Isabella returned to Jessica's seat, bowing her head slightly. "Ma'am, I sincerely apologize for my colleague's actions. I don't know how we can make it up to you." Jessica responded softly, her voice calm but unwavering. "Don't worry about it. I'll handle this myself." Isabella nodded, but Jessica's reply only heightened the tension. The real storm had yet to come. Lisa quickly retreated to the service station, trying to compose herself. But she could feel it, the weight of every gaze following her every move. The judgment in their eyes clung to her like shadows, unrelenting. "Who does she think she is?" Teresa whispered to Mr. Lewis. "She has no idea what she's gotten herself into," Mr. Lewis replied. "But don't worry. I'll make sure she doesn't get away with it." Jessica gently placed a reassuring hand on Emily's shoulder. The little girl still looked shaken, and the air in the cabin felt thick, like something was about to explode. Since the moment Lisa had raised her hand, tension had filled the space, refusing to dissipate. Even though no one spoke, the exchanged glances between passengers radiated their silent fury. Jessica remained quiet, patiently comforting her daughter, giving her time to process what had just happened. But her silence wasn't surrender, it was preparation. A small group of passengers began to gather near Jessica and Emily's seat, making their support visibly known. At the service station, Lisa kept glancing at her watch, praying time would pass more quickly. "As soon as this flight lands, this will all blow over," she told herself. But deep down she knew better. This time it wasn't just the passengers' anger she feared, it was the consequences looming over her. Mark and Isabella stood off to the side, speaking in hushed but urgent tones. We can't let this slide. If we don't take action, the airline will face serious backlash. Isabella nodded. I agree, but Lisa is stubborn. I doubt she'll admit her mistake. We have no choice. We need to confront her now. At the front of the cabin, Mr. Lewis once again approached Jessica. Ma'am, he said gently, please know that you are not alone. Many of us here witnessed everything, and we are ready to stand by you if you choose to take action. Jessica turned to him, offering a small but sincere smile. Thank you. That truly means a lot to me. Mr. Lewis then turned to Emily, his voice warm. You are a very brave little girl. Whatever happened, I am truly sorry that you had to go through this. Emily glanced up at him, her eyes still red from crying. I didn't mean for her to be mad at me. Jessica immediately hugged her daughter tighter. Sweetheart, you did nothing wrong. No one has the right to treat you that way. Do you understand? Emily nodded slowly, the fear in her eyes gradually fading. Just then Mark and Isabella approached Lisa, both of them looking serious. Lisa, you went too far. You need to take responsibility for what you did. Lisa scowled, irritated. I told you, don't lecture me. Listen, Mark said firmly, what you did doesn't just affect you. It affects the entire crew in the airline. Do you have any idea what the passengers are saying? I guarantee they will file complaints, and this time, you won't be able to escape it. Lisa smirked. Let them try. I don't care. Isabella folded her arms, her voice calm but cutting. Lisa, we are not siding with the passengers, but we also can't defend you. What you did is indefensible. If you continue down this path, even we won't be able to help you. Lisa stared at Isabella, the words striking deeper than she wanted to admit. Why is everyone making such a big deal out of this? It was just a misunderstanding. Mark couldn't believe what he was hearing. You slapped a child in front of an entire cabin of passengers, and you think that's just a misunderstanding? Isabella shook her head and walked away. She wasn't going to waste any more words. Lisa wouldn't change that easily. Mark exhaled deeply, disappointment clear in his expression. Emily had stopped crying, but fear still lingered in her small face. A young passenger named Rosa hesitantly stepped forward. Excuse me, is there anything I can do to help? Jessica smiled gently. No need, but I appreciate your kindness. Rosa looked at Jessica with admiration. You're so strong. If I were in your position, I don't think I could have held back. Jessica met Rosa's gaze, seeing the quiet support reflected there. Staying calm is the only way I can protect my daughter right now. More passengers began nodding in agreement, their silent support becoming more apparent. Lisa, meanwhile, felt the weight of her situation pressing down on her. She was beginning to panic as she realized she was no longer facing just one person. She was up against an entire cabin of United passengers. She glanced at her watch again, praying the flight would end soon. From across the aisle, Jessica's gaze remained locked on her, calm but unyielding. Lisa knew this time there was no escape. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin had grown unbearably heavy, like a thick cloud hovering over everyone. Jessica gently stroked Emily's hair, her touch soft despite the storm raging inside her. She knew that if she didn't take action, this moment would leave a lasting mark on her daughter's heart. Does it still hurt, sweetheart? Jessica asked, her voice overflowing with concern, though she tried to hide it. Emily didn't answer, but the red mark on her cheek spoke for itself. Instead, she clung tightly to her mother, seeking comfort in her embrace. Mr. Lewis, observing the scene from a short distance, was still in conversation with Mrs. Teresa. We can't ignore what she did to that child. You're absolutely right, Teresa agreed. She needs to be held accountable. Not only was she unprofessional, but her actions were completely unacceptable. Mr. Lewis nodded. If Jessica decides to file a complaint, I'll testify. That kind of behavior cannot go unpunished. At the back of the cabin, Lisa busied herself checking drink trays and napkins, but her movements lacked confidence. Charles and Isabella had already left her alone, forcing her to face the judgmental stares of the passengers. Lisa exhaled sharply, fidgeting with her fingers on the service counter. She felt like the entire cabin had turned against her, and for the first time she had no one left to turn to. It was just a slap, she muttered under her breath. But no matter how she tried to rationalize it, Lisa knew the passengers wouldn't let this go. And if the complaints reached upper management, she wasn't sure she'd be able to escape the consequences this time. Just then Charles's voice startled her. Why don't you just apologize and admit your mistake? Lisa turned sharply, glaring at him. What are you even talking about? Why should I apologize when I did nothing wrong? Charles shook his head, his voice calm but firm. Lisa, you crossed the line. If you refuse to own up to this, there's nothing more I can do for you. And don't forget what I told you, you can't rely on your connections forever. Sooner or later, everything catches up to you. Lisa scoffed. Don't talk to me like you're my boss. Her voice turned cold. I know what I'm doing, Charles. Stay out of it. Charles sighed deeply and walked away, leaving Lisa standing alone in the crew area. Meanwhile, a small group of passengers had gathered around Jessica and Rosa. Rosa, the woman seated closest to them, was the first to speak. I'm so sorry for what happened. If there's anything I can do to help, please let me know. Jessica nodded, offering a grateful smile. Thank you. That means a lot to me. Mr. Lewis stepped forward as well. We all saw what happened. If you choose to take action, we'll stand with you. The other passengers nodded in agreement, their quiet but firm support giving Jessica even more confidence. Nearby, Isabella approached Charles again. They both knew the situation was getting worse by the minute. I tried talking to Lisa, Charles admitted, but she's too arrogant to listen. If the airline receives a formal complaint, this will escalate quickly. Then we need to report it ourselves, Isabella said decisively. She turned her gaze toward Lisa, who stood alone, acting as if nothing had happened. She's not going to take responsibility on her own. Jessica pressed a kiss to Emily's forehead, her heart aching for her daughter. You should go through with the complaint, Rosa advised. Not just for yourself but for your daughter. Jessica met her gaze and nodded. You're right. I won't let this be forgotten. Around her, Louis, Teresa, and Rosa all reaffirmed their support. At the back of the cabin, Lisa continued to distract herself with work, trying to push away the anxiety creeping up inside her. She could see the passengers whispering, casting glances in her direction. Her unease grew, but she refused to acknowledge it. Just a few more minutes and this flight will be over, she kept telling herself. Jessica, still seated with Emily, remained silent, her gaze fixed on Lisa from across the cabin. Her look wasn't angry, it was calm but filled with unspoken resolve. Lisa exhaled deeply, trying to shake the discomfort settling in her stomach. But deep down, she knew she wasn't going to walk away from this one unscathed. She could feel it, a storm was coming. And this time there was no escaping it. As time passed, Lisa could feel the growing disappointment of the passengers pressing down on her. She wanted to act differently, but she could no longer endure the whispers and stares focused entirely on her. Instead of feeling remorse, she clenched her fists, her pride refusing to let her waver. I don't need their advice. No one can tell me what to do, she told herself. But deep inside, Lisa knew this situation wasn't as simple as before. Doubt crept into her mind. Could her usual connection still protect her this time? Could she really escape the consequences like she always had? What unsettled her the most was the way Jessica was looking at her. There was an unspoken weight in her gaze that Lisa found unbearable. Meanwhile, Emily tugged at her mother's sleeve, growing impatient to go home. Moments later, Charles returned. I've reported everything to the flight manager. They'll take it from here. Lisa's expression darkened. What did you do? Charles sighed, his tone cold. I had no choice. If you won't apologize, then we have to take action. Isabella stepped forward. This isn't personal, Lisa. It's about our responsibility to the passengers. Lisa bit her lip, her frustration growing, but this time she said nothing. Jessica, from a short distance away, kept her gaze steady on Lisa. Emily had finally fallen asleep in her arms, but there was no trace of exhaustion on Jessica's face. Instead, she carried a quiet determination, as if she had made up her mind about something. The silence in the first-class cabin was heavy, not peaceful but charged like the stillness before a storm. Everyone could feel it. And for the first time, Lisa had a sinking realization. This time she wouldn't be able to escape. The tension in the cabin had reached its peak. Though the passengers were quiet, their stares never left Lisa. Wherever she went, their eyes followed. Charles and Isabella stood silently nearby, watching her movements carefully. Meanwhile, Emily remained asleep, and Jessica stayed alert, feeling the silent support of the passengers around her. At the back of the cabin, Lisa went through the drink trays, but the tension in her chest only grew heavier. The passengers' stares felt like flames, burning away her usual confidence. She knew what they wanted. They were all waiting for her to admit her mistake and apologize. But her pride wouldn't let her. Charles approached her once again. They're waiting, Lisa. Just apologize and this will be over. Lisa shook her head slightly. I've told you already, I did nothing wrong. I have nothing to apologize for. Charles exhaled, shaking his head. What's wrong with you? You know you can't rely on your connections forever. This will catch up to you whether you like it or not. Lisa didn't respond, but the fear inside her grew. She felt like she was standing at the edge of a steep cliff, one push away from a devastating fall. Mr. Lewis finally stepped forward, his patience wearing thin. We need answers, he said firmly, loud enough for others to hear. That flight attendant's behavior is unacceptable. The passengers around him nodded in agreement. We paid for premium service, Rosa added. We expect respect from the crew, not this kind of mistreatment. Teresa spoke up next. If we don't receive a genuine apology, we will file a collective complaint. Lisa's stomach dropped. It was like a massive wave had crashed into her. Her throat went dry and for the first time her legs trembled. She tried to maintain her composure, but panic flickered in her wide eyes. Jessica's silence only made things worse. She wasn't yelling, she wasn't making demands, but her quiet strength carried more weight than anything Lisa had ever faced. Lisa tried to look away to escape Jessica's gaze, but it followed her wherever she turned. There was no escape. Isabella took a step closer. Lisa, if you don't take responsibility, this is only going to get worse for you. Everything is out of your control now. Do something before it's too late. Lisa's voice wavered as she tried to hold on to her pride. I don't need to be lectured. This was just a misunderstanding. Isabella raised an eyebrow, her frustration breaking through. A misunderstanding? You slapped the child. Do you hear yourself? Her words cut through the thick air, drawing the attention of the surrounding passengers. Lisa, though she refused to show it, was struggling to figure out what to do next. Meanwhile, as Emily slept, Jessica gently ran her fingers through her daughter's hair, fully aware of what she needed to do. Even without speaking, her gaze burned with determination. She was ready to act. The pressure weighed heavily on Lisa. Charles and Isabella were clearly disappointed in her. And now it was obvious, everyone in the cabin was against her. Lisa's mind raced. What do I do? Her instincts told her that explaining herself might help, but her pride screamed at her not to do it. She had always believed she could rely on her connections. But this time she knew, it wouldn't be enough. Jessica stood up, carefully placing Emily against the seat. All eyes followed her as she slowly walked forward. The cabin grew even quieter, thick with anticipation. She stopped right in front of Lisa. Jessica's eyes met hers, unblinking. She hadn't even spoken yet, but her message was clear. End this now. Do you have anything to say? Jessica asked, her voice calm but unwavering. Lisa hesitated. She had no way out. She clung to her pride, but the weight of the passenger's judgment crushed any defense she had left. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Jessica didn't wait. She turned and walked back to her seat, her composure unshaken. The confrontation was over, but everyone knew this was only the beginning of the real storm. When the flight finally landed and the cabin doors opened, passengers caught their first glimpse of the airport outside. But what truly stopped Lisa in her tracks was what she saw at the entrance. There stood Raoul, the airline's executive director. Beside him was a group of senior staff, all dressed in formal attire. A new wave of dread washed over Lisa. Jessica and Emily prepared to disembark, while Raoul's gaze shifted toward them. Jessica turned to her daughter. Raoul is here now. We'll get this resolved. Emily looked up, still clutching her mother's hand. She won't hurt me anymore, right, Mommy? Jessica knelt down and kissed her forehead. No, sweetheart. No one will hurt you again. Raoul stepped into the first-class cabin, walking past Lisa without even acknowledging her. Then he stopped. Lisa, he said. Explain yourself. Lisa's voice trembled. For the first time she couldn't hide her fear. Mr. Raoul? It was just a misunderstanding. I never meant to hurt anyone. The passengers are just blowing things out of proportion. Raoul raised a hand, silencing her. I've heard enough, from both the crew and the passengers. This is not a misunderstanding. Then a voice spoke from the crowd. Mr. Raoul, I was a direct witness to the incident, Mr. Lewis said. There is no justification for what your flight attendant did. We expect the airline to take appropriate action. Rosa added, that's right. We are all prepared to testify. As a professional flight attendant, she should be protecting passengers, not mistreating them. Lisa looked around, searching for support. But there was none. She was completely alone. Raoul turned to Jessica. Ma'am, I sincerely apologize for what you and your daughter experienced. This does not reflect the values our airline upholds. Jessica responded in a steady voice. Thank you. But this isn't just about me. I only hope the airline ensures this never happens to another passenger again. At that moment, Raoul's expression changed. He looked at Jessica more closely. Are you Helen Morales? The owner of the investment group affiliated with our airline? The entire cabin fell silent. Lisa's eyes widened in disbelief. Jessica nodded. Yes. But today I am simply a mother protecting her child. And in that instant Lisa knew, no connection could save her now. You are suspended. We will conduct a formal investigation immediately and report this to senior management. Prepare yourself for the consequences of your actions. Lisa had nothing left to say. Not a single word. She lowered her head in silence and quietly exited the cabin, distancing herself from the judgmental stares of everyone on board. Jessica turned to Raoul and expressed her gratitude. Thank you for taking swift action. I hope this serves as a reminder to the entire system. Raoul nodded. We assure you this will never happen again. Before leaving, Emily looked up at Raoul and spoke in her small, sincere voice. Thank you for helping my mommy and me. Raoul met the child's gaze and smiled warmly. You're a very brave girl. Keep that beautiful smile. As Jessica and Emily descended from the plane, the passengers looked at them with deep admiration and respect, truly moved by the strength of the woman they had witnessed. Lisa, on the other hand, could do nothing now but face the reality of her actions alone. In the end, justice was served. Lisa was permanently dismissed from the airline and banned from working in any airport ever again. News of the incident spread quickly across newspapers and media platforms, further intensifying the disgrace she was already experiencing, especially given the high-profile individual involved in the matter. Meanwhile, Jessica focused on comforting her daughter. As a mother, her only wish was to protect Emily and surround her with love. As Jessica and Emily stepped out of the airport, flashes from cameras lit up the night. Reporters swarmed around them, shouting over one another in an attempt to get a statement. Ms. Morales, are you planning to sue the airline? What do you think about Lisa being permanently dismissed? Can you share how you're feeling right now? Jessica tightened her grip on Emily's hand, her eyes sharp yet composed. She didn't respond. Instead, she gently pulled her daughter closer and walked straight toward the waiting car. From a distance, hidden in the shadows, Lisa watched everything unfold. Her eyes burned with a mixture of regret, anger, and desperation. She had lost everything, her career, her reputation, and even her pride. But deep inside, only one thought consumed her. This isn't over. She gripped her phone tightly, her fingers trembling as they hovered over the screen. Finally, she typed out a short, simple message. I need help. On the other end, someone received the message. A faint smirk appeared on their lips. This is just the beginning. Are Jessica and Emily truly safe? What will Lisa do next? And who is the mysterious person behind the message? Stay tuned for the next chapter to uncover the hidden truth behind this scandal.